Welcome to Ring of Fire. I'm Farron Cousins, sitting in for Mike Papantonio this week. Coming up on today's show, we'll find out why the Republicans continue to fight a war against our government. And cuts to Social Security could be a reality in the very near future, and we'll tell you who is selling out America's retired workers. And there could be even more prosecutions coming for those who helped pull off massive Ponzi schemes. And this time, it could be Wall Street bankers headed to prison. We have all that and more coming up, so stay tuned. You've just entered the Ring of Fire.
You can't change Washington from the inside. You can only change it from the outside.
Grand jury secrecy rules.
For political gain.
The press can find out.
That has nothing to do with politics, but go ahead.
It wouldn't bother me.
Oops.
Both the Republicans in Washington and their constituents back home seem to think that the government is at the root of all that is wrong with America. Whether it's social safety net programs or federal regulations, they've made it clear that if the government supports it, they want it gone. Joining me now to talk about the Republicans' war on our government are attorneys Howard Nations and Michael Burg. Howard, I want to start with you. Before we really get into the Republicans wanting to get rid of everything government related, the Democrats are already in a bad position on this. Explain that a little bit.
Well, the Democrats, President Obama, and the leaders of Congress are facing a dilemma. And that dilemma is whether you negotiate or don't negotiate with the far right-wing extremists in the Republican Party who are currently running the party. If they choose not to negotiate, they can have the same result they did last time. As we approach another government shutdown, then they'll bring them right up to the edge, they can let it go, and in that case, the extremists will give up, they will fold as they always do, and the Democrats will win points because they'll blame it on the Republicans. The problem with that is the American public loses because there's true damage from a government shutdown as we saw in the last one. The other side of that is if they choose to negotiate, then they give some degree of credibility to extreme positions. The fact that you'll even talk to a Ted Cruz, that you'll even negotiate with a Ted Cruz, gives some credibility to his, or at least the perception of credibility to his position, which is totally lacking in credibility. What's actually needed is an honest debate on what role should the federal government play in the lives of Americans. If we have that debate, then the Republicans will be exposed as being the pro-corporate party, anti-citizen party that they are.
Mike, one of the big issues that they're going after is, Medicare, Social Security, all of these so-called entitlement programs. Paul Ryan, one of the guys leading the charge there, and they're pushing this voucher program, which essentially is just privatization of these government services that are actually working quite well. Explain this, whole voucher thing they're trying to push.
Well, the Ryan Medicare plan really is a hoax. The whole voucher plan is really to help the rich and to really injure the seniors in this country. The way it's laid out is that you'd basically get a voucher that would give you the ability to use that for health care. Really quite similar to what we're trying to do with Obamacare, but it would be for seniors. But the way it actually works out is that these seniors, who many of which live below the poverty level, would be using whatever money they would get from Social Security to pay for the health care benefits. What's crazy about this whole plan is it really doesn't fix the problem. In fact, all it really does is takes us back to the dark ages where we take our seniors and make them eat cat food or put them out on an iceberg and let them fend for themselves. This is not the America we should have, nor is the America that the Democrats should allow to happen.
Right, and that's part of the biggest problem is that we've got Democrats willing to sign on for cuts to Medicare, cuts to Social Security. They don't appear to have any fight left in them. We just had this huge victory where they didn't back down on the government shutdown, and now they're willing to sit at the table with people like Ted Cruz and Michelle Bachmann and say, okay, let's talk about this. Let's figure out what you want, what we want. Let's meet somewhere in the middle. And the American public is never going to win when you have somebody like Ted Cruz getting basically anything he wants. But Howard, back to you for a minute. This whole argument really seems to be missing the real issues that are facing this country today, doesn't it?
Well, the big issue in Medicare should be medical cost control. They continue to increase just out of sight, and we have the highest medical costs in the world. And that should be the subject of debate. How can we control cost? Why don't we have that debate? Because the Republicans refuse to debate that issue. We have two separate and distinct parties here with two separate and distinct constituencies. The Democrats represent healthcare users. The Republicans represent healthcare corporations. And the healthcare users are the people who are now being hurt more and more by increased cost, and the healthcare corporations are those that are making increased profits. We see that, for example, very clearly in the pharma bill, where the government refused to let the largest user of pharmaceutical drugs in the world, the largest purchaser in the world, the U.S. government, they refused to let the U.S. government negotiate cost of the drugs with pharmaceutical companies. And this is only going to get worse because the CBO says that the Republican plan that Mike was talking about will actually increase healthcare costs by 40 to 50%, if you can imagine that.
Well, you brought up the great point there about not being able to negotiate prices. The Canadian government, with their universal healthcare system, they can negotiate, and so people in Canada will pay anywhere between a 5 and a 10% markup on pharmaceuticals, which isn't bad when you consider some of these pills. Obviously, they do cost a couple million to create. I know off the top of my head Vioxx, which killed tons of people, but it cost them about 2.4 million in R&D to create the drug, and then they were selling it. It cost about 1.5 pennies to create, but they sold that drug with a 10,000% markup. So, and that still goes on. That happens with all kinds of drugs, Lipitor, everything, these medications that people a lot of times have to take to survive. But,
the pharmaceutical industry also gets the benefit of a lot of government research in pharmaceuticals, that they get that free, and then we still cannot negotiate prices with them.
It's absolutely, it's ridiculous. But, Medicare is not the only thing that's on the table. Mike, they've got other cuts that they want to make to the government too, right?
Well, they do. And just let me add one thing about the cost of health care. Most of the money goes to big pharma in these incredible markups you've talked about, that you and Howard have talked about. And the other really cost increase comes from managed health care. It doesn't go to the doctors. It doesn't go to the hospital. It goes to people who sit in offices who deny benefits to people who have health care, and then their CEOs and their top executives are making obscene salaries in the hundreds of millions up to the billions of dollars in bonuses. That's what's driving up the cost of health care. With regard to other cuts, they want to cut FEMA. We have all these incredible disasters. The Republicans refuse to recognize climate change, and yet we're having these disasters. We're having disasters like the Hurricane Sandy. We're having disasters here in Colorado. Rains that we've never had, flooding going on. But the Republicans want to cut FEMA. Where they don't want to cut is the defense budget, where we have thousands of tanks sitting in a warehouse that are never going to be used. And we're spending billions and billions of dollars there, and yet we're driving up the cost of health care. It's really, their whole plan is only for the rich and the corporate giants and the people that they're trying to represent, and fool the American public that somehow it's the problem is based on the users, as Howard said, not based on the fact that we have these giant corporations and the richest people in the world making obscene profits. That's the problem we have here.
Well, okay, this whole war on government, here's the way I look at it. Both of you guys are very, very prominent attorneys. Let's say I'm a young attorney. I come apply for a job at your firm, and I say, look, this firm is not good. You don't do good things. You got a lot of problems. I don't like it. I think your firm should basically go away. Would you hire me for a job? Because that's what the American public is
Absolutely.
doing with the Republican Party. They campaign on the fact that I hate this institution. I hate this government. So send me to it.
Well, what happens though? What happens here, Farron, is I have a good friend of mine whose father is really into this idea of the Republican cuts. And yet that person is on Social Security. That person is on Medicare. And when you talk to them and you say, wait a second, you're getting the benefit of those government programs. You're getting that benefit. They go, but I earned it. And it's this idea, and it's nothing more than this messaging that is going through through the media and really being messaged by people like Senator Cruz, who we all agree is way out of line, Michelle Bachmann, and they're getting people to vote against their own interest, and that's what's crazy, and that's what's going on. The truth has to come out as to where the real problem is.
Howard, the Democrats are not sitting by, as we talked about earlier. They're actually starting to get in on this idea that maybe we can cut back on some of these government programs, government regulations that are saving lives. I mean, there's no way to get around it. The government regulations that are in place, they save lives, they create jobs. The government programs, Medicare, Social Security, they save lives by giving people money to buy food, buy medication. But the Democrats appear to be on board with some of these.
It's terrible. When you examine the actual Republican budget, you see that what they want to cut are things like flood warnings, coastal emergencies like Sandy, maybe Katrina, processing Social Security applications, local law enforcement, FBI, food assistance. All these things have broad public support. And yet, as you say, they're getting some Democratic support for this. And the Democratic support comes from just total weakness, the inability, the total lack of leadership. Can you imagine Sam Rayburn putting up with 72 Tea Party members running the House of Representatives? Can you imagine Lyndon Johnson tolerating for a minute a guy like Ted Cruz, who's been a United States Senator for, almost 10 full months now? He would crush these people. You need real leadership, and we don't have leadership in either the House or in the Senate, and unfortunately we're not getting the leadership out of the White House that we need. I think President Obama needs to take a weekend off and go read the complete biography of Lyndon Johnson if he wants to know how to run a government.
Obama certainly needs to, I think he needs to take a vacation, go back, watch videos of himself speaking from 2007 and 2008 and say, you know what? That was the guy that the American people elected. That was the guy that America needed. And that is the guy that is going to fix this country. Howard Nation's Mike Burg, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Farron.
Coming up, we'll find out why Democrats are actually warming up to the horrible idea to cut Social Security benefits. You're watching Ring of Fire, and we'll be right back.
You're watching Free Speech TV, a network powered by the people.
Welcome back to Ring of Fire. I'm Farron Cousins, and for Mike Papantonio this week. Millions of Americans depend on Social Security to be able to put food on their table and to basically keep their heads above water after retirement. But more importantly, they earned this money by paying into the system for their entire working lives. Still, there's serious talk in Washington about cutting Social Security benefits, and I'm joined now by best-selling author Cliff Schecter to tell us why this is even being considered. Cliff, the big talk after the government shutdown and this budget battles is that Social Security cuts are definitely on the table. It's part of negotiations. What are they thinking?
I have no idea, Farron. First of all, thank you for having me on. Second of all, it's amazing. It's sort of like anytime there's a fiscal crisis, it makes you think of shock doctrine, doesn't it? Which became such a big book. It's almost like you just have to get ready because they're going to find their way to Social Security, to Medicare, to programs that people need, and do not need to be cut in any way. In fact, should be enhanced if we're going to live up to the promises that we've made in the past, and ones if we want to try to compete with other, I don't know, civilized countries. But somehow this grand bargain, it's like a mixture between, I don't know, a vampire, a zombie, and maybe a Twinkie. You just can't kill it. It will survive if there was a nuclear war. The fix the debtors would still be out there calling for this. Let's be very clear. Social Security has its own funding. It has nothing to do with the budget. That's first of all. Second of all, right now, deficits are coming down faster than any time since World War II. That's something you don't hear these guys talking about. There is no debt crisis, which we should practice saying. Three, if you still were going to want to cut Social Security, cut the budget somehow, let's start looking at defense spending, farm subsidies to Monsanto, oil subsidies in places where you actually could do cutting. It's just, and let's go to number 4 in that. If you somehow had to reform Social Security, there's a payroll tax cap. Now, only $113,700 is taxed for Social Security. You know what that is? That's everyone, that's 100% plus income for virtually every American, also known as 1% of Mitt Romney's income, or the cost of 2 mid-sized car elevators. So that's what puts us in a slightly different place. So there's so many ways around this, but yet they talk about cutting this vital, important, and historic program, and it's just so angering. It really is.
The talk about it really plays down how important Social Security is. The majority of senior citizens depend on this. For a lot of them, it is their only source of income, and it's already been cut down from about $1,500 per month to I think now it's closer to $1,200 per month. I mean, this is not some big cash cow for people. They worked their whole lives, 30, 40, sometimes 50 years paying into this system. We owe them this money at this point. This is not an entitlement.
Right. They are earned benefits. You earned them. You paid into it. And when we talk about, again, it's just this thing that can't die. These guys come up with these fake crises that don't really exist. When you have people doing honest accounting, people that aren't being paid off to see things a different way. The New America Foundation did a study, and they looked at this and said, when you look at the fact that private pensions are just all but disappearing, guaranteed pensions, that 401ks have crashed for people who are retiring because of Wall Street, and there are going to be many ups and downs. People are going to rely more and more on Social Security in the future. If anything, as this New America Foundation study found, we should be enhancing it. We should be adding a huge amount of money to it. And that would be the smart thing to do. But instead, people talk of cutting it. It just is so stupid in every way.
Well, you kind of brought up there, and you brought it up earlier, there is plenty of money if Social Security is facing a budget shortfall, which they weren't a few years ago. George Bush took that surplus out of it, paid for his wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. But, that's a different story altogether.
Right. I mean, hell, the budgets don't matter. As Dick Cheney said, Reagan taught us deficits don't matter until they suddenly do when there's a Democratic president.
But you could make up that difference. You could fully fund this program to where it's completely solvent if you cut the subsidies for big oil, cut the tax breaks for the people who don't need them, and all these other little subsidies out there that go to corporations that, again, they don't need them. The senior citizens need this money. This is their life. They've paid it. They've earned it. This is theirs. And there's so many options out there where we could fix this problem, and it's not being done. Instead, they're saying, let's get rid of it.
That's of course it. I mean, we should start off by saying that there isn't even a problem. I mean, what we know is guaranteed 100% of benefits are paid through somewhere between 2033 and 2037, 20 years. It's entirely taken care of. Then, unlike some people who've been getting up and propagandizing about sadly Dick Durbin, majority whip Democrat among them, who said, oh, well, then it runs out of money. Well, what's 78% of benefits between friends, right? Because that's what it'll pay then. It doesn't run out of money. It then starts paying 78% of its benefits. We have numerous plans, as you're pointing to, of how to take care of that. First of all, as you said, we could save $40 billion, $80 billion if you do both of them, $40 billion over 10 years from getting rid of these farm subsidies, big agribusiness, another $40 billion over 10 years, the 10-year budget being what I'm talking about. If we get rid of subsidies for big oil, because Exxon only makes like $8 billion a quarter, so you wouldn't want to get rid of that. And then, look at our defense budget. I mean, you look at the fact that we don't spend as much as Russia, let's say, or spend as much as Russia and China. We spend as much of, we have as much of a budget as Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, France, England, Japan, Canada, Australia, Brazil, Argentina. I've missed a few countries in there. Okay, we can cut the defense budget a little bit. There's a reason why over the last decade, Washington's become the most prosperous metropolitan area in this country. It's called defense contractors who've gone making hundreds of millions of dollars a year. So we could do all that, but quickly, if we wanted to actually deal with the issue of the cap right now and $113,000 of income, there's a number of plans. Tom Harkin offered one where we phase out the cap, so all income is subject to this tax. Bernie Sanders offered another plan which would protect people who make between that 113 now and 250,000, but all income from 250,000 up would be taxed under would be payroll, would hit the payroll tax, would cover it, and that would go to Social Security. They estimate that that would cover us for the next 75 years. Okay, so there's numerous plans here. It's not a crisis. There is no deficit problem. There is no debt problem. This is ridiculous, is what it is.
Okay, that's absolutely correct. There is not a problem. But as you also mentioned there, you brought up Dick Durbin. Now, Dick Durbin is a Democrat, and that's important to say. This is not just a Republican plan to cut Social Security. Obama's the one who included, the chain CPI in the budget, but we've got at least 9 Democratic senators who are on board with cuts. We've got Dianne Feinstein, Max Baucus, Joe Manchin, Chris Coons, Tom Carper, Michael Bennet. These guys say, you know what? Sure, senior citizens, maybe they've had it a little too good for a little too long. Let's cut these benefits. I mean, this is a bipartisan effort that more supporters are jumping on all the time, and that is very, very dangerous.
It's ridiculous is what it is. Maybe people are eating the highest, most expensive brand of cat food, so we need to cut down so they can eat the cheap stuff. It's disgusting, and I'm disappointed. Dick Durbin is a progressive on most issues, is very good on most issues. I assume he's doing the White House's bidding here, because I don't know why else he'd be doing this. Others, like Mark Warner, Max Baucus, became, neoliberal jokes a long time ago who just do what they think makes them look like they're serious people in Washington, maybe gets them the best lobbying job. Or somehow Mark Warner thinks that gets him to the presidency, not realizing this is no longer 1996 where the DLC runs things. Get through a Democratic primary, Mark Warner. Good luck there. I don't know what these people are thinking, because again, as you said, they make it bipartisan. It's still a mostly Republican effort. It still is, it's all Republicans, but they find enough Democrats to go along with this idiocy to do this. I don't know, because we talked about the policy of it, how good it is. Now let's talk about the politics, okay? Republicans have a 68% disapproval rating, roughly on par with scurvy, I'd say, right? Not cleaning up dog poop, something of that sort. The Tea Party brand is down to a 21% approval rating at this point. They've destroyed themselves with this government shutdown because it showed everybody what their ideology is. Our way or the highway, no compromises. We don't care. We're going to cut everybody's benefits. We're going to hurt working people, and we don't care if we shut down the government and we cost the country $24 billion in debt. So Democrats have a historic opportunity in 2014 to get these crazy teabaggers out of Washington to either win back the House or win back a number of seats, so the Republicans only have a bare majority in the House, to hold on to the Senate. And what these guys want to go handing these people a political issue? You want to hand them on a silver platter Social Security to run against you? I mean, how stupid. I mean, are these people the stupidest political minds in Washington? I don't know. Sorry, I can't just express my disgust for how dumb they are.
Well, no, that is a fantastic point. The Democrats are willing to go along with this and own it. This was a Republican idea, a Republican plan, but the Republicans in this instance, for some reason, are actually smart enough to let the Democrats sign on and then own it, and then they're going to use it, and they're going to run against them with it a year from now. I mean, the Democrats are walking right into a trap, and they don't even see it.
Yeah, these 9 Democrats should never be allowed to run anything again, because clearly they're too stupid to be alive, quite frankly. I don't know how else to put it. I mean, how can you Social Security, let's be clear here. 84% of people in polls, that's everyone, do not want their Social Security touched, including 90-something% of Democrats. You know who else that includes? 74% of self-described Tea Partiers. This is one of the few issues that Democrats who are losing, the only demographic they're losing, older white guys, they can win that demographic by talking about protecting Social Security and Medicare from Republicans. So these 9 geniuses are going to go and hand this issue to these guys and say, we're the Social Security cutters. And of course, we know Republicans will never be cynical enough to run ads against Democrats in the midterms pointing out that they cut Social Security, because they would never do that.
That's true. Cliff Schecter, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on, Farron. I appreciate it.
Just ahead, we'll find out why Wall Street bankers are terrified about a new round of prosecutions for Ponzi schemes. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with more Ring of Fire.
Hi, I'm Mike Papantonio, host of Ring of Fire on Free Speech TV. The corporate-controlled media rakes in millions of dollars in profit every year by only telling you half of the story. They're at the mercy of their corporate sponsors, and they refuse to take on corporations that kill, maim, and harm consumers. Here at Free Speech TV, we don't have shareholders. We don't answer to corporate America, and we don't pull any punches. Our loyalty is to the viewers, and our viewers are the ones that help keep Free Speech TV alive. Free Speech TV doesn't take corporate money, and that's why your financial support is so important to us. Viewer voices, not corporate sponsors, fuel Free Speech TV and drive many of our programming decisions. You can help protect Free Speech TV with your donation. Free Speech TV airs independent news and views for independent thinkers like you. Our people-powered programs demonstrate what's possible in our democracy when we unite as workers, as students, as artists, as parents, and partners in progress. More people means more power. Each donation brings more power in programs and more possibilities for change. Our programming equips viewers with vital tools, resources, contacts, and examples of how to collectively build alternative, sustainable solutions to serious community problems. Please donate now and bring these organizing tools into your community. Everyone should have access to news and information that's forming the world around them. Our goal is to keep you and everybody involved. We aim to reach every viewer possible because we're all in this together. Go online to freespeech.org and help support independent, honest news journalism. Your support helps keep information flowing, and together we can hold the corporate media more accountable.
Welcome back to Ring of Fire. I'm Farron Cousins in for Mike Papantonio this week. Ponzi schemes are complicated financial scams that take a lot of moving parts to pull off. And you can't even say Ponzi scheme without an image of Bernie Madoff coming to mind. But Madoff didn't act alone in his scam, and soon there could be a new round of litigation against the bankers who helped pull off these financial scams. Joining me now to discuss this is attorney Nancy Fineman. Nancy, thanks for being with me today.
Thanks so much, Farron. Good morning.
Good morning. So, a few years ago, even just the phrase Ponzi scheme wasn't in the American lexicon at all, but now, people use it to describe everything from the healthcare law to Social Security. What exactly is a Ponzi scheme?
Well, a Ponzi scheme's named after an Italian immigrant named Charles Ponzi, who was the first reported Ponzier, as we would say. And what a Ponzi scheme is an investment where new investments fuel the investment by paying old investors. So when the new investment money dries up, the Ponzi scheme fails. And the most classic one, as most people know, is the Bernie Madoff one that hit the headlines in 2008 and still has effects throughout, really, the world.
Well, okay, I understand you've actually spoken with Bernie Madoff about this. Can you tell us what happened in that conversation?
Sure. My law partner and I, Joe Cachet, went to Butner, North Carolina in July of 2009 after Mr. Madoff was first transferred there. We sat with him for 5.5 hours to get information about lawsuits that we've brought on behalf of investors. And basically, Mr. Madoff told us that he acted alone. And we knew that wasn't true because we knew already that some of his cohorts were about to plead guilty. So we got as much information as we could from him, knowing that most of what he was telling us was not true. But even when you lie, you give a good indication about how things went. Mr. Madoff was terribly arrogant and not at all concerned about the impact that he had on his victims.
So he actually made the claim that he worked alone in this, that this was all his idea, nobody else understood what was going on?
That's correct. He said that there was no one but him that knew what he worked all alone. And at that time, his top lieutenant was just about to plead guilty. In fact, did plead guilty a few weeks after we met. So that was the first of the start of a lot of people saying, yeah, we knew what was going on.
Well, now I've seen in the news, J.P. Morgan is being investigated and could possibly be facing some litigation. I believe HSBC not that long ago paid about $1.9 billion in a fraud money laundering scam. Do you know anything about the J.P. Morgan issue?
I certainly do. We sued J.P. Morgan in our suits. We haven't had a ruling about whether we can proceed against them, but we found out long before all these news articles came out that J.P. Morgan, who had been Madoff's banks for years, was transferring money back and forth from the London office, and as is reported in the newspaper now, what our complaint alleges is that they didn't follow the money laundering rules, and therefore they substantially assisted Madoff in his Ponzi scheme.
And they also, some of the fraud against J.P. Morgan, some of the claims is that they were actually also hiring, the sons and daughters of, senior Chinese government officials because they were helping them launder money. So I mean, this whole scheme really has this broad, international scope. I mean, this is not just a couple investors in the United States. I mean, some of these scams really, stretch, across the coast, across the ocean.
Madoff did all over the world, Europe, Asia, and the impact was enormous. It's still being felt, and it's really tragic that people who had the responsibility to stop it, bankers, accountants, even lawyers, don't do their duties and raise the red flags.
So what is the status of any ongoing litigation in the Madoff case? I mean, are there any other indictments coming out, or has that one been kind of wrapped?
Well, there is a trial, I believe, going on in New York right now against some of the Madoff employees, and the statute of limitations for the criminal trials, indictments, I believe, stops in December because Madoff, it was December 8th that he admitted to the Ponzi scheme. Civil litigation, including ours, is ongoing, and so we've had some settlements. We hope to have more. We hope to go to trial against those that aided and abetted the Madoff Ponzi scheme.
We've got about a minute left here. Are there any other major banks that have been accused of anything of this type? Any other individuals on a Madoff scale that's going on right now? Or any investigations?
Well, the SEC is really the regulatory arm, and since 2010, they've had over 100 enforcement actions. They brought actions against 250 entities and over 200 individuals. So every day, large and small, there are Ponzi schemes that affect ordinary people, and they don't have to be on the large scale of Madoff. If you lose your money, it doesn't matter who defrauded you. You've had a loss of money and usually a loss of trust because you're investing in someone that you've come to respect and rely upon.
Well, it's great that you're handling cases, that your firm is handling these, and hopefully you guys can hold people accountable and make things right for all these consumers that have been ripped off and essentially had their financial security stripped away from them. Nancy Fineman, thanks for being with me.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
It's been 11 months since the tragic shootings that took place in Newtown, Connecticut, and America is no closer to meaningful gun control legislation than we were before the massacre took place. Joining me now to explain why that is and why reform is desperately needed is Elliot Fineman, President and CEO of the National Gun Victims Action Council. Elliot, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, as I just brought up, we've been all year, we've had town hall debates, we've had debates in Congress, we've had grassroots efforts, but as of right now, it doesn't appear that there's any meaningful action taking place in Washington to really, crack down on gun control, is there?
No, not really. What we do have is a continuation of the strategy that our side has followed that essentially has gone for 19 years at the federal level. What I mean by that is that it's 19 years since the Brady Act was passed, and in that time there hasn't been one single law passed at the federal level that would have served to reduce gun violence. In fact, quite to the contrary, laws have been passed that in fact would increase gun violence and have done that.
Well, I know, saw a story, just last week that since Newtown, there have been almost 10,000. I think we're at over 9,900 gun deaths in the United States. I mean, if that is not a call to action, I don't know what is. I mean, we had this. It wasn't just Newtown. Last year and the year before, just almost constant. We would turn on the news and there would be these tragic stories of somebody walking in with an assault rifle, somebody who shouldn't have been able to purchase a firearm, yet they got it and they go and they commit these horrendous actions. And it still continues to this day. And there's almost, it feels like there's nothing being done, and we're just sitting and waiting for the next tragedy to happen.
Well, we certainly are. And the issue, the solution, there is a solution, by the way, which we'll discuss in a moment, but the issue is a question of strategy. Historically, there's never been a major social change that hasn't had an economic component to it. You can go back to Gandhi's salt strike in India, to the labor laws in our country in the beginning of the 1900s, to civil rights, to gay and lesbian rights. There's always been an economic component. Our side has not had that. And that is what National Gun Victims Action Council has introduced, an economic component to force sane gun laws. We've well established that by asking the politicians, by presenting data such as you've just presented, 9,000 killed, murdered by guns since Newtown, that's not going to have an effect. And there's two reasons for that. One is the enormous influence of the NRA, the enormous amount of money they have in their historical connections with certain of the legislators. And the other is a structural issue, which I call the Wyoming problem. And essentially it goes like this. Imagine that the United States consisted of two states, California and Wyoming. That was it. And 38 million people in California wanted, say, background checks, and the 1 million people who live in Wyoming did not. You could credibly say that 38 million out of 39 million, or 97% of the country, wants background checks. However, since each state has 2 senators and you need 3 senators to get background checks, that's the issue. The question is, how do you get one of the Wyoming senators to go for background checks? And what we've concluded is that the only way to do that would be to punish the state of Wyoming, say by tourism boycotts and whatever, other things we would. That would give the senator there a pretext for saying that in order to protect the state, they'd have to vote for background checks. That's the only way it's going to happen. And we can force that to happen because we have the numbers. There are 100 million people that polls show want sane gun laws. There's roughly 1 million NRA radicalized members who want no gun laws. So it's 100 million to 1 million. We simply have to organize the 100 million, and we're doing that through a pledge on our website. If I can mention it, www.gunvictimsaction.org, where we want people to sign our Tell and Compel pledge, which just says that when we call for, say, the boycott of Wyoming, that they'll be on board with it. As soon as we have a critical mass, we can change the gun laws, and we can do it pretty quickly.
Well, it's very admirable work of the National Gun Victims Action Council, and it is desperately needed. We've only got about 30 seconds left here. Again, the website, if you want to give that out one more time, that'd be great.
www.gunvictimsaction.org.
And people can go there, they can sign up, they can make this pledge. They can stand up to the NRA, and that is what is desperately needed in this country right now. Elliot Fineman, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Farron. Take care.
And when we come back, we'll be taking a look at President Obama's drone wars. I'm Farron Cousins, sitting in for Mike Papantonio. We'll be right back with more Ring of Fire.
Stand up, stand up.
Welcome back to Ring of Fire. I'm Farron Cousins, sitting in for Mike Papantonio this week. President Obama is quickly building a foreign policy legacy that will be defined by one word: drones. And recent reports from human rights organizations tell us that many of these attacks have been completely unjustified. Joining me now to explain this is Alex Kane, the world editor for Alternet.org. Alex, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on.
So recently we had both Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch deliver these two concurrent reports, basically taking a look at some of the drone attacks that have happened in places like Pakistan and Yemen. And what they determined was that a lot of these attacks were completely unjustified. Explain that a little bit.
Right. Well, both Amnesty International, as you said, and Human Rights Watch released comprehensive investigative reports detailing drone strikes in both Yemen, in Human Rights Watch's case, and Pakistan for Amnesty International. They both released the reports on the same day, but Amnesty focused on Pakistan and Human Rights Watch focused on Yemen. Of course, these are two different aspects of sort of the same drone program, although they're run somewhat differently. But they both had similar messages in that they said that the drone strikes they investigated, and these were a specific sort of handful of drone strikes. They weren't every single drone strike in each of these countries. That would probably be impossible to do. But in the sort of, in Amnesty International's case, they investigated 9. In Human Rights Watch's case, they investigated about 6 attacks. They found that civilians were killed and that it may have violated either the law of war or international human rights law, depending on the body of law that we're looking at. The US says that we are in an armed conflict with Al-Qaeda and associated forces. Human Rights Watch has called that into question in terms of Yemen, and Amnesty International is sort of inconclusive about which body of law should be applied. But regardless of the body of law applied, they both say that international law has been violated, that the right to life has been violated, that there may have been extrajudicial executions in Pakistan and Yemen. And so these are really devastating reports to come out that detail the harm to civilians that the drone strike program has inflicted.
Well, I know, in the first month of this year, in January of 2013, there were at least 15 covert drone operations that the public is aware of. And in those, that was Yemen, Somalia, Pakistan, and the number I've got here is it killed 120 people, 20 of those civilians, 4 of them were children, and this was just 1 month out of this year. I mean, is this typical of what's happening in these drone wars? I mean, are we really seeing casualty numbers add up this quickly?
Well, the casualty numbers and civilian casualties specifically are really at the heart of the debate about drone strikes. Since the Obama administration has come in and escalated its drone attacks, human rights groups and journalists have said that civilians are being killed. But there is no hard and fast number we can look at, and there are really two narratives that we have. We have the US government's narrative that civilian casualties are extremely low. Although President Obama admitted in May 2013 that there have been civilian deaths from the drone strikes in Pakistan and Yemen, before that, top officials in the Obama administration, most notably John Brenner, head of the CIA, said that there have been no casualties. So that's one side of the narrative. The narrative said by human rights groups and journalists is that there have been a lot more civilians killed. For example, the Bureau of Investigative Journalism says between 400 and 900 civilians in Pakistan have been killed. Now, that we're not entirely sure who's telling the truth or not, but that also gets to the sort of transparency issue. The U.S. government has not been transparent when it comes to the drone program, and so we don't know. They haven't released casualty numbers. They haven't released who they've killed, and so on.
Well, okay, the transparency issue is a very, very big issue. I know back in May, Obama came out and he said, look, a lot of people have a big problem with this. We're going to make this whole program is going to be more transparent. You know, the UN tells us to make it more transparent. The human rights groups tell us to make it more transparent. So, you know, he's had 5 months now. Has anything changed? Is there any more transparency than there was 6 months ago?
Right. Well, in May 2013, his big speech on counterterrorism policy that a lot of people were applauding because he had promised more transparency hasn't really followed through. Obama said that he's going to be talking to Congress more. He's going to be telling the American people more about our drone program. I don't think that promise has been fulfilled. For example, there was a drone strike in the months after his big address on counterterrorism policy, where an 8-year-old boy in Yemen was killed. They were targeting an alleged member of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, the branch of Al-Qaeda that is based in Yemen, and they also killed an 8-year-old boy, according to media reports. When ProPublica's Cora Courier, who is a journalist who has been working on these issues, spoke to the White House about this specific strike, they said they had nothing to say. The same thing has been going on with every drone strike that we've seen since his speech. There has not been a detailed accounting of who has been killed, who was the target, what the damage is. And so, you know, both Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch in their recent reports say that more transparency has to be a policy of the Obama administration going forward, because it's just not what's happened.
Well, I know, especially after the speech, you had all of the Obama apologists, these Obama bots. They came out and they said, look, you know, he's going to make this an honest program. You know, you guys jumped on him too soon. But the major talking point, and this is coming from, you know, both the Obama apologists and those on the right, is that, you know what, anytime there is an attack, if we were to send soldiers in there on foot, civilians are going to die. So, you know, it's really not that big of a deal. Yes, civilians die, but we're taking out the bad guys. They believe that the end justifies the means. And that's not the case we're seeing with these drones, is it? I mean, there's reports that you mentioned the 8-year-old boy. There's reports, you know, they struck down a grandmother who was out picking vegetables with her grandchildren. I mean, these can be very, very targeted, where they can take out 1 or 2 people specifically without killing everyone around them. So, I mean, this argument that, you know, civilians die in war, that's a reality, I think here does not apply whatsoever.
Well, I think that's a sort of false framing that we have. You know, sort of people that are in favor of drone strikes, they always say that these are precise tools, they're surgical strikes, that they really are the best way to target militants, the Taliban, people associated with Al-Qaeda, without putting both American boots on the ground and without inflicting a large number of civilian casualties. It may be the case that drone strikes kill less civilians than a full-scale invasion like we saw in Iraq. But then the question we should ask is, should any civilians be dying from US drone strikes? We're engaged in a global war on terror with no geographic boundaries. The sort of apologists for drone strikes say that this is the model the US should be operating on. We should be on this war footing. But critics of drone strikes say that there's another model available. There's law enforcement models. There's ways we can explore to try to capture people we have evidence against. And there are also sort of structural routes that we can address that would turn people away from anti-American violence. So the false framing is that we have to be in this sort of global, endless war that the U.S. is fighting right now.
Well, and there's two major problems that I see. We've only got about a minute left, but one is obviously just like during the Bush years with his wars, the use of these drone strikes, when it takes out civilians like this, we're creating more hatred against the U.S. in parts of the world who already, have a very strong anti-American feeling. We're fostering that with these drone strikes. The second one is, what happens when these bad guys get their hands on a drone? It's happened with all sorts of U.S. weapons in the past. There's no reason to think that eventually, maybe a month from now, maybe 10 years from now, that these same people that we're going after could easily have this same technology, and then it comes home, then it comes here, and then maybe these people who've been apologizing for this will have the guts to stand up and say, you know what, we were wrong about this. Alex Kane, world editor for Alternet.org, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks.
And that's it for this week's Ring of Fire, but you can always get more from Pap, Bobby Kennedy, and Sam Cedar online at ringoffireradio.com. You can follow us on Twitter at Ring of Fire Radio, and you can find me on there as well at Farron Balanced. And you can also follow Ring of Fire on Facebook. For Mike Papantonio, I'm Farron Cousins, and we'll see you next week right here on Ring of Fire.
Hi, I'm Mike Papantonio, host of Ring of Fire on Free Speech TV. The corporate-controlled media rakes in millions of dollars in profit every year by only telling you half of the story. They're at the mercy of their corporate sponsors, and they refuse to take on corporations that kill, maim, and harm consumers. Here at Free Speech TV, we don't have shareholders. We don't answer to corporate America, and we don't pull any punches. Our loyalty is to the viewers, and our viewers are the ones that help keep Free Speech TV alive. Free Speech TV doesn't take corporate money, and that's why your financial support is so important to us. Viewer voices, not corporate sponsors, fuel Free Speech TV and drive many of our programming decisions. You can help protect Free Speech TV with your donation. Free Speech TV airs independent news and views for independent thinkers like you. Our people-powered programs demonstrate what's possible in our democracy when we unite as workers, as students, as artists, as parents, and partners in progress. More people means more power. Each donation brings more power in programs and more possibilities for change. Our programming equips viewers with vital tools, resources, contacts, and examples of how to collectively build alternative, sustainable solutions to serious community problems. Please donate now and bring these organizing tools into your community. Everyone should have access to news and information that's forming the world around them. Our goal is to keep you and everybody involved. We aim to reach every viewer possible because we're all in this together. Go online to freespeech.org and help support independent, honest news journalism. Your support helps keep information flowing, and together we can hold the corporate media more accountable.